In a quiet town, a chilling story began to unfold that would shake the community and shatter lives. As the investigation progressed, disturbing details began to emerge, revealing a brutal reality behind the seemingly inconspicuous facade. The evidence pointed to a horrifying conclusion, forcing those involved to confront a reality that was both disturbing and deeply tragic. As the police dug deeper, they discovered a horrifying truth that no one in the town could have imagined. What happened was not just a crime story, but a perversion of human nature and the destructive consequences of uncontrolled rage. Little Joshua was 3 years old when his mother, Krista, a 23-year-old single mother, moved the family to Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1992. Krista started working as a real estate rental agent at a residential complex almost immediately after the transfer. The things were going well. She soon got to know Joe, a 22-year-old employee at the building's fitness center. They became romantically involved, and Joe loved Joshua as his own son. After they started to live together as a normal American family, they eventually got married. Krista found herself pregnant after 3 years. A baby girl, Lauren, was born on December 5, 1996, 1 week before Krista's birthday and 1 month before Christmas. Krista always thought her daughter was the greatest present she could have received for Christmas. The family was incredibly unified and close-knit, and Lauren's birth strengthened their bond. Joe's father, Grandpa Dusty, loved his grandchildren dearly and treated them as if they were his own children. However, when Joe's employment was eliminated in 1999, the family found itself in financial jeopardy. The family survived on odd jobs for a while because he was unable to find work. They had to relocate to Phoenix, Arizona in order to obtain steady employment. The 1,500 kilometers trip was seen by the couple as an adventure, but it was also a major test for the entire family. Particularly impressed was tiny Lauren. They had never seen mountains before, and suddenly they found themselves at their feet. Lauren enjoyed to sing, was an energetic and fearless child, and played sports on a regular basis. She had a strong affinity for football at the age of 4 and enjoyed playing goalie. Krista fell pregnant again while Lauren was attending school. The family made the decision to move back to Oklahoma before the kid was even born in order to be nearer to Joe's parents and receive the assistance they needed. Managing 3 children would have been far more challenging. The family ventured to relocate once more in spite of the stress and challenges of the initial transfer. A child named Dustin was born to Krista on October 26, 2002, in remembrance of his cherished grandfather. He was born during the Halloween season, which turned into one of the family's favorite occasions. They planned themed parties each year and dressed up as various characters. The only girl in the group, Lauren grew up to be a real dad's daughter and was particularly close to Joe. He even taught her how to wield guns and track prey when he brought her hunting with him. The family added a boy named Tyler as a 4th child in February 2005. Lauren played doll-like with her younger brothers, feeding, dressing, and putting them to bed. She also spent a lot of time with them. The children got along well with their sister, and she never hurt them. The family made their home in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a city of roughly 115,000 residents. Despite being a comparatively tiny city, it was the 4th largest in the state. Broken Arrow was regarded as the safest city in Oklahoma due to its low crime rate. Even yet, it was not enough to shield the family from the horrible disaster that befell them. 2009 saw a sea change in Lauren's life as she entered a challenging adolescent phase. Lauren began experiencing the typical troubles that come with adolescence, and her mental health issues made matters worse. After worried parents brought their only daughter in for a checkup, the physician determined that she had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This illness impairs one's capacity for focus and impulse control. Medication administered to Lauren was meant to relieve her symptoms, but in reality, it made things worse. Lauren started to isolate herself from friends and family, becoming silent and reclusive. The swine flu epidemic, which mimicked the COVID-19 pandemic but on a smaller scale, made matters worse. The cherished grandfather of the family passed away at this time due to an infection, shocking all of the family members, especially the little ones who were closest to him. Lauren started hurting herself after this incident, which led to other issues. Krista has up until now maintained a joyful family video journal, but moving forward, the lighthearted and easygoing films gave way to darker ones. Krista started recording films of her daughter when she started hurting herself, hoping to see if any new injuries were developing. Krista was unable to determine what was going on or why her daughter's health was getting worse. Every time the conversation veered toward subjects that Lauren found uncomfortable and failed to connect, Lauren withdrew within herself. The true cause behind the teenager's withdrawal was revealed to the family at a later date. It transpired that Lauren had joined a new social circle recently. She was once left alone with an unknown peer who coerced her into having sex. The psychological impact of this on Lauren was terrible. Although Lauren was afraid to inform her parents about it, she was able to gain support as the truth came to light. Lauren was given a prescription for medicine and brought to psychotherapy sessions. Lauren's mental health stabilized during the ensuing years. She made new friends and returned to being gregarious and outgoing. Zach was first introduced to Lauren in 2012. They became friends right away and started hanging out all the time. The teenagers had similar appearances. They eventually fell in love with one another. Zach seemed like a kind and decent young man, so Lauren's family welcomed him with open arms. With the family's youngest members, Zach took on the role of an elder brother. When they both turned 16 in February of the same year, the young individuals set about their relationship official. Lauren made the decision to move in with her boyfriend and move out of her parents' house in the middle of the school year. Their goals were to move into an independent family, get married, and get an apartment. Lauren's parents thought Zach was too young to make such a significant life decision. Therefore, they did not share their daughter's excitement at the prospect of cohabitation. They were afraid of ruining their relationship with daughter and starting a fresh round of sadness, so they chose not to impede the girl's independence. However, Lauren's parents were worried that her romance might drive her to disregard her studies. The daughter eventually won their approval after assuring them that this would not occur. Lauren's mother, Krista, had a sneaking suspicion that her daughter was pregnant, which is why the decision to move in together and be married quickly was made. Lauren said she wasn't sure in response to a direct question about pregnancy. After that, Krista brought her to the hospital where a pregnancy test was performed. The results were positive. The family was surprised to learn of Lauren's early pregnancy, but they all encouraged her and looked forward to her baby's arrival. On March 22, 2015, Lauren, at 19 years old, gave birth to a girl named Edison Main. Zach's parents were overjoyed to hear this news as well, accepting their new duties as grandfather and grandmother without passing judgment on the young couple. Lauren managed to finish her secondary education a few months after giving birth. On July 16, 2016, she was legally married to Zach, and the two then embarked on a honeymoon to Branson, Missouri. Although the pair appeared happy on the outside, Lauren had been battling inner demons for years. She made references to the severe anguish she was still experiencing from her previous emotional scars in posts on social media. Lauren was resolved to battle for her daughter and her loved ones at the same time. Zach obtained employment to support his family, although at first, parents of both of them gave a lot of assistance. But by October of 2016, things had shifted. Lauren bemoaned the monotony and dullness of daily living, expressed her frustration at being at home alone with the child all the time, and expressed her desire to start working as soon as possible in her posts. The young mother sought self-realization despite her unwavering love for her daughter, which she confided in her family about. The couple made the decision to upgrade their living arrangements at the same time. They offered to divide the cost of renting a larger flat with their old pals, Connor Browner and his girlfriend Alexandra Finley. They could save money and live comfortably as a result, even if they had kids. The two families eventually moved in together. Living together was peaceful and enjoyable at first. Everyone talked to one another, helped one another out, and spent time together. In an effort to become more independent, Lauren eventually secured a position as a salesperson at a business in 2017. She told her mother that she was still having depression problems at the same time. Lauren wore all black, including her makeup and hair color. Her general psychological state worsened as her marriage to her husband deteriorated. Sometime later, they split up and moved out separately from the couple of friends they lived with. Once more, Zach, Lauren, and their daughter were left on their own and experienced ennui. A few months later, the marriage started to fail. Zach went back to his mother in an attempt to ease the tension, but it was ineffective. Even for the benefit of the child, the couple was unable to rekindle their closeness, and the same year they filed for divorce. It's interesting to note that the ex-partner's relationship improved for a short while, but not permanently after the formal split. Consequently, they soon had the audacity to drastically alter their personal lives. Lauren experienced intense loneliness and a lack of male support when she was left alone with the child. She soon experienced the new love she had always yearned for. Their previous roommate Connor and Lauren began dating. Lauren and Connor grew closer as a result of their shared experience ending relationships, and a romantic spark emerged between them. Zach was devastated by this revelation and still held out hope for the family's reconciliation. All the same, he had to accept his ex-wife's decision. September 2017 marked the end of the divorce process. The parents decided to share weekly care of their 2-year-old daughter, giving them joint custody. Everyone was happy with this choice. Zach became even more hostile toward Connor as a result of his illicit drug use. Lauren eventually started smoking marijuana as well. Zach did not appreciate the raucous parties that were happening more and more in the apartment where lived his daughter. He made an unsuccessful attempt to sway his ex-wife. There were constant points of contention between Lauren and her new partner, and with Zach as well. When the girl's parents found out that their daughter had traded in her ex-husband for a man who led a chaotic lifestyle, they were taken aback. But they thought that eventually the young person would cool down and maybe they might salvage the connection. However, in contrast to what families had hoped for, nothing changed. After a year, Lauren's life was rapidly deteriorating by the fall of 2018. She and Connor discovered themselves surrounded by a public that used illegal substances. The young couple started going to parties more and more frequently. Furthermore, Lauren befriended Shanana, a wild individual who frequently incited risky circumstances. Lauren's parents were quite concerned about these situations. At that point, Lauren created a new social media profile using the identity of one of her alter personalities. The picture, with its dark, gothic aesthetic, conveyed the girl's inner turmoil. She talked extensively about dissociative identity disorder on the page, which is characterized by a person's identity splitting, giving the appearance that multiple personalities dwell in one body. Lauren appears to have recognized 4 of these subpersonalities in herself. Lauren was scheduled to meet her mother on October 26, 2018, in honor of her brother's birthday. But what awaited her was a somber talk rather than some enjoyable family time. Krista tried to talk to her daughter but couldn't get through to her about her lifestyle. After the conversation descended into a furious altercation, Lauren turned around, shut the door, and walked out. Her relatives had not seen her alive from that point. Blake, Lauren's friend, called Krista the following evening. Lauren was nowhere to be found, despite his agreement to drive her to a friend's house so they could get ready for Halloween. The guy was frightened by this and made the decision to call her mother. Blake claimed that he had met with Lauren the previous evening and driven her to the closest petrol station. Mike West, a tattoo artist, was waiting for Lauren that day. Lauren wanted to be dropped off there. They collaborated on the design of a new tattoo that she intended to have applied at his residence that same day. He continued to communicate with Lauren into the evening, according to her acquaintance. She gave him the specifics of the tattoo before abruptly ceasing to answer calls and messages. Blake was somewhat aback by this, since Lauren never let go of her phone. Lauren's mother, Krista, wrote to her current daughter's boyfriend, Connor, and her former son-in-law, Zach, in a panic after learning about this. Zach attested that although Lauren had intended to pick up their daughter, she never did. The relatives were further worried by this news. Krista called the police right away because she was so concerned. After receiving the missing person complaint, the police launched an investigation. Unfortunately, Blake's testimony, who isn't Lauren's close friend, was the only lead in the early phases of the investigation. The girl's friends and family provided the police with all the information they needed to put together a thorough account of the girl's appearance and attire on the day she vanished. They said Lauren was wearing jeans, boots, a black jacket, and a black blouse. The tattoo artist Blake had identified, Mike West, was located by the police rather fast. Mike verified that he had picked Lauren up from the gas station that evening and taken her to his house, where they were supposed to finish the tattoo sketch before moving on to actually tattooing the artwork into Lauren's body. The man added that Lauren's boyfriend, Connor, had unexpectedly joined them later. Lauren requested for permission to go out with Connor for a short while, and she reassured him that everything was well. But she never came back after that. Mike never saw her again, even though he waited for her the entire evening. Speaking with Connor, who appeared to be the last person to see Lauren before she disappeared, was the next course of action for the detectives. According to the guy, Lauren arranged to meet a buddy at the closest Walmart grocery on the day she was having her tattoo, so he took her there in his car. Connor said to have carried on with his company after that. He claimed that Lauren never followed through on her promise to call as soon as she had some spare time. Connor wasn't too concerned and held off on raising the alarm since he reasoned that perhaps a friend or another person had picked her up by then. Regarding the precise sequence of events that day, Connor's testimony contained some inconsistencies that the investigators took note of. They made the decision to closely examine his statements and ascertain Lauren's actual fate in the vicinity of that supermarket. The cops used footage from Walmart's security cameras, where Connor was rumored to have driven the missing girl, to accomplish this. After receiving the video files, law enforcement officials started to closely examine them. Krista, the mother of the missing girl, was also contacted by the detectives in the meantime. The mother said that Connor and her daughter had a poisonous connection, and initially, she was adamantly opposed to them communicating. The couple had been fighting more frequently in recent months, and their tension continued to rise. Additionally, Krista stated that Lauren and Connor had already broken up and were obviously not together on the day he was supposed to drive her to the grocery store when she vanished. Lauren avoided seeing her ex-boyfriend and communicating with him since she didn't want to carry on the relationship. The fact that Connor was the last person to see Lauren before her abduction hence caused great concern for the mother. The woman's animosity toward her daughter's former lover was openly expressed, particularly in light of his drug addiction and propensity for physical assault. Krista claims that Connor's constant pushing of Lauren was a contributing factor in their breakup. She was certain that the man was connected to her daughter's abduction, so she demanded that the investigators examine him closely. Zach, Lauren's ex-husband, was included in the group of suspects nevertheless. The detectives were aware that he was going through a very traumatic divorce from his wife, and that several of their mutual acquaintances had told them about her new connection. The cops were unable to see Connor's car when reviewing the security footage from the Walmart supermarket parking lot. Though it's possible that he just parked in a blind location, Lauren wasn't visible anywhere inside the business. Despite examining the CCTV records for several hours, the investigators were unable to locate the girl. This could only mean that Connor had lied once more. That is, that she had never been there. Lauren had been missing for more than 48 hours, which is a key amount of time beyond which the likelihood of discovering the missing individual alive dramatically decreases. Family members were beginning to lose hope. The authorities asked the public to assist in the search for the young mother after the woman's pictures went viral in the media. Abruptly, the police station hotline was called by an unidentified witness. He claimed to have seen Connor pull up to his house in his automobile the night Lauren vanished. Unidentified witness also said that Connor attempted to conceal the obvious bloodstains on the floor mats and seats in the cabin by covering them, but this did not totally cover them up. Connor allegedly said that he had struck a dog on the road in response to a question about the source of the stains. Everything was drenched in blood, he said, because he had to carry the injured animal in the cabin to the closest veterinary clinic. However, the witness thought there was just too much blood for this kind of explanation. The unidentified source said that he was unaware of Connor's girlfriend's disappearance at the time, which is why he failed to give the incident any urgency and failed to call the police. But after learning the news, he made the decision to alert the investigators to this dubious information. After learning of this, the investigators started to view Connor as the primary suspect in the crime. They made the decision to study his background and biography in more detail. It transpired that the man had already been afoul of the law, primarily as a result of a small-scale domestic dispute. Furthermore, once he resisted the police officers during the arrest. That time, Lauren phoned the police during a heated argument that transpired less than a year prior to their breakup. It's true that Lauren later chose not to file a lawsuit, which ended the dispute. The investigators also discovered that Connor was seeing someone else at the time of his ex-girlfriend's disappearance. It appeared that he was not at all concerned about Lauren's fate. But the detectives still called him in to ask him a few questions. Connor modified his prior testimony this time. In his revised account, he accompanied Lauren to Walmart on that particular day so she could get syringe needles. This was allegedly required for Lauren to receive painkiller injections after the tattoo appointment. Although Connor stated he was initially opposed to this proposal, he was unable to convince Lauren. He supposedly just carried on with his business after that, did not seeing her, and is unsure of what transpired next. The investigators' concerns were only aroused by such disparities in the testimony. Connor was obviously hiding something, as seen by the way he changed his storyline on a regular basis and added new elements. Additionally, neither his automobile nor Lauren were captured on camera near the grocery, and staff members at the business were unable to recall the youngster. The authorities were able to acquire the suspect's mobile phone data in order to follow his whereabouts. As it happened, Connor was very close to Walmart that night, approximately 10 p.m., which was far later than he had originally claimed. The police discovered that although Connor did visit the grocery that evening, he was there with a different girl, Alexandra Finley, his ex, who they had previously rented an apartment with. This information was discovered while reviewing the surveillance camera footage. The couple was filmed shopping for Halloween while wandering through the store with a carefree demeanor. However, the cops were particularly interested in the numerous cleaning supplies they had purchased. This felt like a really suspicious fact. The investigators made the decision to speak with Alexandra regarding such purchases because of their experience. Alexandra verified that Connor had called her that evening, requesting her assistance with washing the automobile. He related a tale about a fight that broke out in the car's cabin between two of his friends. One of them was wounded, supposedly, and the blood was all over the place. Then, posing as a hero, Connor drove the wounded man to the hospital. This is the reason the man called his ex-girlfriend for assistance, since he desperately needed cleaning supplies to clean. Alexandra accepted this bizarre tale, went shopping with Connor, and afterwards assisted him in cleaning the dried bloodstains from the carpets and upholstery. The police were able to examine the primary suspect's vehicle in great detail after obtaining a search warrant. They discovered many blood traces in the car, despite someone's best efforts to wipe them away. Nobody questioned that this blood belonged to the missing Lauren at that precise moment. Based on all the evidence, Lauren had lost a significant amount of blood. Therefore, the stains would never fully come out. After examining the site, experts determined that the person had most likely died from large blood loss following a severe injury. Samples of biological material were carefully gathered by investigators and sent off for analysis. Subsequent laboratory testing verified the worst suspicions. The blood found did in fact belong to Lauren, who went missing. Connor altered his testimony once more after being shown this proof. This time, the suspect stated that he had picked up Lauren from the grocery store, but that she was accompanied by a girl who was purportedly trying to get drugs from a friend. Lauren was shot in the head by the person who had pulled a gun after something went wrong. The murderer allegedly aimed the gun at Connor too, and told him to drive to the closest location where the body could be disposed of. After driving a short distance, the man put the lifeless Lauren into a garbage under the direction of the armed stranger. Connor maintained his innocence and non-involvement at the same time. This account of events sounded as muddled and unbelievable as the last ones. It was particularly frustrating because the trash in that area was picked up on a daily basis. The canisters were already empty when the police got there, but her bracelet and some blood, which very likely belonged to Lauren, were discovered there. Additionally, these samples were sent for analysis. Subsequent analysis verified that the blood discovered corresponded to the missing girl. On November 5, 2018, Connor was approached by the investigators in an attempt to get him to confess. The claim that Lauren was shot by some drug dealer was not taken seriously by the authorities. Eventually, they broke the suspect, and he admitted that he had argued with Lauren in the car that fatal night. Lauren steadfastly refused to leave the cabin. To intimidate her, her irritated ex-boyfriend took out a revolver. But as far as he was concerned, the magazine just dropped out by accident. Connor dropped to pick it up and accidentally squeezed the gun. Lauren was struck squarely in the face by the gunshot that went off. The authorities, however, did not think it was an accident. Their skepticism regarding Connor's veracity as a witness only grew. Nevertheless, because of the law enforcement officials' unwavering efforts, they were able to get a confession from the suspect regarding his actions. After being apprehended, the killer, 22, was booked into the Tulsa County Jail. The search for Lauren's body was the next duty. The detainee testified that he disposed of it in a paper waste bin, even giving a precise location. The GPS tracker data from his automobile provided confirmation of this. The contents of that container were transported to the closest landfill by a garbage truck the very next day. The police now had to locate the landfill to where it was transferred and locate the body as quickly as possible before it vanished into the vast rubbish dumps. The investigators identified the truck that emptied the unfortunate container after going over the CCTV camera footage. A team of 30 police officers was dispatched to investigate 72 sorting facilities that catered to 19 garbage recycling businesses throughout 16 states. Not much time remained for the hunt. The detectives were acquainted with every step of the recycling process for waste paper. It involved a number of technological processes that allowed the body to be broken up into tiny pieces. In theory, there were still a few locations where the remains might be located, but there was very little chance of this happening because the processing lines were highly automated and there weren't many employees. The police increasingly recognized after many hours of futile searching that Lauren's remains had probably already gone through the whole recycling process. But there was no stopping it. Finding the body was crucial for closely examining the wounds and contrasting them with Connor's story. It was agreed to send dog handlers with service dogs who are trained to look for corpses by the distinct smell of decomposition to the businesses in order to make this incredibly difficult duty easier. The canines eventually located the remains of the young woman. Pieces of skin, bones, and internal organs crushed by the processing machinery. The remains were officially confirmed by DNA experts to be those of the missing Lauren. To prevent human organs from finding their way into the finished product, the recycling company promptly recalled 30 tons of paper that had been created the day before. After finding out the horrific reality about her daughter's passing, Lauren's distraught mother sobbed as she informed the police about how painfully she remembered their final encounter. After a fight, they split up, and Krista will never be able to give her baby child a hug or say sorry to her again. The mother said that she was uncomfortable with Lauren's relationship with Connor right away, and told her daughter over and over again that the guy would only cause her sorrow. Regretfully, her worries were realized. The issues persisted even after the breakup. Krista had to make multiple calls to Lauren's ex-boyfriend, threatening to report him to the police if he didn't stop chasing the girl. But this narrative ended tragically. Even though the mother did her best to keep her daughter safe, Krista, unable to control her outrage at how viciously Connor treated her daughter, threw the body of her child in the trash like rubbish. Simultaneously, there were many in their town who backed the murderer. Some recalled him as just a regular guy who they shared their childhood years with. While no one defended what he had done, others hypothesized that the murder might have been an incidental or inadvertent event. Meanwhile, Connor's residence was thoroughly searched. In the garbage can, there was a gun. The sequence of events leading up to Lauren's death may be meticulously reconstructed thanks to all the information gathered. The prosecution claimed that when Connor enticed his ex-girlfriend to leave the tattoo artist's home, they started fighting in the car. Following a heated exchange of words, the irate man pulled out a gun, shot Lauren, and dropped her body into a dumpster. The murderer then, as if nothing had occurred, got down to clean the blood-stained car cabin before heading to work, and later that evening, out to meet friends. 2020 saw the matter appear in court in January. Connor never acknowledged his guilt, even in light of the overwhelming evidence the prosecution presented. He was confident that he would be found guilty of manslaughter at most by the jury. The prosecutors demonstrated the intentionality of this crime. The prosecutors released the findings of their examination of the communications from the defendant's phone, notwithstanding the attorney's insistence that the fatal shot was fired accidentally. It found out that Connor's relationship with another girl had started before his separation with Lauren. The man called his former girlfriend a parasite in texts he sent to his mistresses, speaking terribly of her. He accused Lauren of wrecking his life and refusing to leave him alone. Connor said in the same letter that he would be willing to commit any crime, including murder, in order to get rid of the bothersome ex-girlfriend. However, these claims ran counter to the victim's mother's evidence, which stated that Connor was the one who was chasing her daughter around and was unable to move on from the split. He made the decision that Lauren would not be with anyone since he could not let her go. The jury determined that the defendant was guilty of premeditated murder after taking into account all the relevant circumstances. Connor, age 23, was given a life sentence. He will, however, be able to request parole after 38 years and 3 months. Following the announcement of the verdict, Krista, the mother of the dead, declared that she would never pardon the person who killed her daughter. "We will never be able to come to terms with this loss," she said. We don't even have a place where we may visit and remember Lauren. We have no one to bury. It began with a love that promised to defy the odds, a connection so powerful that it blinded her to the dangers lurking beneath the surface. He was charming, persuasive, and in the beginning, showered her with the kind of affection she had always dreamed of. But behind the facade was a man capable of unimaginable cruelty, a predator biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The heart of this tragic tale centers around a woman whose dreams of happiness quickly unraveled, revealing a life of torment beneath the surface. Maria Fernanda Casada, born on June 18, 1994, in the small town of La Rita in Guanacas province, northern Costa Rica, was a miracle child. Her birth was nothing short of extraordinary for the Casada family, as Maria's mother had struggled with infertility for years. Doctors had given up hope, stating that she would never be able to conceive. Yet, against all odds, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Maria became the light of her parents' lives, showered with love and affection. They dedicated themselves to providing her with a nurturing environment, ensuring she had everything she needed to grow up happy and healthy. As Maria grew, she longed for siblings, desiring the company and camaraderie that comes with a large family. Unfortunately, her mother's health issues made it impossible for her parents to have more children, so Maria remained an only child. This only strengthened her resolve to one day have a large family of her own, dreaming of at least 3 children. Her parents, who worked hard and were considered well off by local standards, supported her dreams and ambitions. They invested in her education, encouraging her talents and creativity in every possible way. The family home was a spacious, cozy sanctuary where Maria could explore her interests, including music and art. Maria had a close-knit relationship with her family, particularly with her maternal aunt. Her aunt, just 6 years older, was more like an older sister, and the two shared a deep bond. They grew up almost as equals, confiding in each other and becoming inseparable companions. Maria was a bright student with a natural flair for creativity. She excelled in school and was passionate about painting and sculpture. Her empathetic and kind nature made her well-liked among peers, and she easily made friends, always eager to help those in need. As Maria entered her teenage years, she began dating a boy she had known since childhood. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and he appeared to be a loving and dependable partner. However, everything changed when Maria discovered she was pregnant. At just 18, she was ecstatic yet apprehensive about becoming a mother. Her boyfriend, on the other hand, was unprepared for such a responsibility. He insisted she terminate the pregnancy, and when Maria refused, he ended their relationship abruptly. Heartbroken, she clung to the hope that he would change his mind once their child was born. Unfortunately, he had already moved on, becoming involved with another girl and distancing himself completely from Maria and their unborn child. Despite her emotional turmoil, Maria found solace and strength in her family. Her parents and aunt rallied around her, offering both emotional and financial support. They helped her through the difficult pregnancy and the early days of motherhood. Yet, Maria was determined to stand on her own 2 feet. She wanted to provide a stable future for her son without being a burden to her family. It was during this time of soul-searching that she stumbled upon online tutorials for making soap and crafting decorative candles from wax. Her natural artistic abilities made these crafts a perfect outlet for her creativity. She quickly saw the potential in this newfound passion and began to envision a business that could support her and her child. Maria's talent and dedication soon paid off. Maria immersed herself in her craft, producing handmade candles and soap, which she sold through an online store she had carefully built. She poured her creativity into every piece, designing products that were both beautiful and functional. To expand her reach, Maria created social media groups where she advertised her goods, took custom orders, and engaged with her growing community of followers. Each candle and bar of soap she produced was unique, tailored to individual customer preferences. Her attention to detail and passion for her work quickly earned her a loyal customer base, and her business began to thrive. Orders came in faster than she had anticipated, and she found herself working day and night to keep up with demand. Maria was not content to stop there. She constantly sought to improve her craft, studying new techniques and experimenting with innovative designs and ingredients. Her goal was to become a top-tier artisan, someone known for the quality and creativity of her products. She dreamed of one day saving enough money to open her own shop, a physical space where customers could come and experience her work firsthand. In addition to her business, Maria began offering online classes in soap making, sharing her skills with others while earning a decent income. Teaching became another source of fulfillment for her, as she found joy in helping others discover the same passion she had for creating beautiful handmade items. Despite her growing success, Maria remained grounded, continuing to live with her parents and her son. She was diligent about saving money, her eyes always on the future. In addition to her professional goals, she also dreamed of furthering her education, imagining a day when she could balance her creative work with academic achievements. Yet, amidst all her hard work and aspirations, Maria longed for something else, something deeper and more personal. She dreamed of meeting a man who would not only love her but also embrace her son as his own. She wanted to build the strong, happy family she had always envisioned. Maria's dreams of meeting a worthy partner were shared by her family, who also hoped she would find someone who could provide her with the love and stability she deserved. In the fall of 2017, Maria made a routine trip to the city to buy supplies for her candle and soap-making business. While shopping, she was approached by a man named Rovira Vargas, a charming and confident stranger who complimented her beauty and struck up a conversation. Vargas's charm seemed genuine, and Maria, taken by his flattery and confident demeanor, agreed to have coffee with him. Their brief meeting left a lasting impression on Maria, and she soon found herself thinking of Vargas constantly. After their coffee date, they exchanged phone numbers, and what started as casual conversations quickly blossomed into a romance. Vargas was 12 years older than Maria, but the age difference did not concern her. She was swept off her feet by his attention and the intensity with which he pursued her. However, those around her were less convinced. Vargas, despite his outward charm, was nothing like Maria. He was rough around the edges, harsh, rude, and quick-tempered. He frequently used foul language and exhibited a number of bad habits that made those close to Maria uncomfortable. He never talked about his past, which only added to the air of mystery and suspicion that surrounded him. Even more alarming was Vargas' questionable financial situation. He did not appear to have a stable job, yet he always seemed to have money. He drove an old pickup truck in which he kept a firearm stashed in the glove compartment. He was never without the pistol, although he never explained why he carried it. Maria had her suspicions that Vargas was involved in illegal activities, but she was too afraid to confront him about it. She decided to ignore the warning signs, convincing herself that his love for her was genuine and that whatever secrets he was hiding were not important enough to jeopardize their relationship. 4 months into their relationship, Maria decided it was time for Vargas to meet her family. Nervous about their reaction, she hoped they would give him a chance. However, their first encounter confirmed her worst fears. Vargas was abrasive and rude from the moment he stepped into their home. He dismissed their questions and reacted with anger and hostility to even the simplest remarks. His behavior frightened Maria's parents, and as soon as he left, they urged her to end the relationship. They were deeply concerned for her safety, worried that Vargas' volatile nature would only lead to more trouble. But Maria, blinded by love, refused to listen. She was convinced that her care and affection could change him, that underneath his rough exterior was a man capable of being the loving partner and father she so desperately wanted. She believed that with time and patience, Vargas would calm down, settle into family life, and become the kind of husband and father she had always dreamed of. Her hopes were pinned on the future, a future where they would have children together, creating the large, happy family she had always envisioned. A few weeks after the disastrous meeting with Maria's parents, Vargas invited her to meet his family. Hoping for a different outcome, Maria agreed to attend a family dinner at his mother's house. However, the evening quickly turned into a nightmare. Vargas' family was just as hostile and unrefined as he was. His relatives were loud, foul-mouthed, and quick to anger, much like Vargas himself. Any minor disagreement quickly escalated into a shouting match, and Maria found herself caught in the middle of a toxic environment. To make matters worse, Vargas' family openly disapproved of her. They compared her to his ex-girlfriends, making it clear that they saw her as inferior. The fact that she had a child from a previous relationship only added to their disdain. This meeting was a turning point for Maria, as it forced her to confront the harsh reality of her relationship. The man she loved was not only abusive and secretive, but also came from a family that perpetuated the same aggressive and toxic behavior. Yet, despite all these signs, Maria's hope and love for Vargas kept her from walking away. She was deeply invested in the idea that she could fix things, that love could conquer all, even the deep-seated anger and dysfunction that surrounded Vargas and his family. Maria clenched her fists, struggling to hold back the tears that stung her eyes, feeling humiliated and crushed by the cruel treatment she received from Vargas's family. The situation grew even worse when the alcohol flowed freely. Vargas' relatives were heavy drinkers, and once they were intoxicated, they became even more aggressive and volatile. Their cruel jokes and harsh remarks left Maria feeling helpless, as though she were trapped in a nightmare. Despite these challenges, she still shared her thoughts candidly with her parents, hoping for comfort and understanding. Her father and mother, already alarmed by her situation, once again tried to convince her to leave Vargas. They could see what Maria refused to admit. Her relationship with him was toxic, and the environment he came from was dangerous. Her parents pleaded with her to end the relationship and distance herself from his volatile family. Yet Maria stood firm, clinging to the hope that things would change. Vargas had moments where he acted kindly and tried to control his temper in her presence, and Maria believed this was proof that he could change for the better. In December 2018, Maria discovered she was pregnant with Vargas' child. Although she hoped this news would bring them closer together, Vargas' reaction was far from joyful. He was indifferent, even irritated, but he reluctantly agreed that it was time for them to get married. Maria convinced herself that the arrival of their baby would bring about a new chapter of happiness. They were married on April 6, 2019, during a picturesque beachside ceremony. Maria, 4 months pregnant, wore a radiant white dress, trying to push away the dark clouds already gathering over her marriage. After the wedding, Maria and Vargas moved into a small house he owned. From the very first days of their marriage, Vargas' mask began to slip, and he showed his true, violent nature. His temper flared at the slightest provocation, and he no longer hesitated to take out his anger on Maria. Tantrums erupted over trivial matters, and soon the verbal abuse escalated to physical violence. Insults were hurled at her with increasing regularity, and beatings became a regular occurrence, often in front of her 5-year-old son. The little boy was forced to witness these horrors, his mother's anguish a constant presence in their home. For months, Maria endured this abuse in silence. She lived in fear, terrified not only for herself, but also for her unborn child and her older son. She stopped visiting her parents to prevent them from seeing the bruises that covered her body. She wore long sleeves, even in the heat of the Costa Rican summer, and skillfully applied makeup to conceal the marks on her face. But her strength was waning, and the fear for her children was growing. She convinced herself that everything would change once the baby was born, hoping that fatherhood would soften Vargas' heart and transform him into the caring man she desperately wanted him to be. Meanwhile, Vargas had perfected his manipulation tactics. He reminded Maria that he had accepted her with a child from another man, something he claimed no other man would have done. He constantly shifted the blame for his actions onto her, making her believe that she was responsible for his outbursts. Vargas preyed on her fear of being alone, knowing that Maria dreaded the thought of raising 2 children by herself. His control over her was absolute, and Maria, trapped by her love and fear, remained in the toxic relationship, hoping against hope that things would improve. However, A breaking point came just before the birth of their child. After one particularly brutal beating, Maria could no longer bear it. She hastily packed a bag, took her son, and fled to her parents' home. Her parents were horrified by the state she was in. Her body was covered in bruises, and she was visibly shaken, traumatized by the ordeal she had endured. They urged her to go to the police, to finally take a stand and seek protection for herself and her children. But Maria, ever fearful and hopeful that Vargas could change, refused. She was not ready to give up on her marriage, convinced that the arrival of their baby would make everything better. In the final weeks before her due date, Maria stayed at her parents' house where she found some temporary peace. Despite her parents' repeated pleas to file for divorce and protect herself, Maria clung to the hope that the birth of her child would change everything. On August 11, 2019, Maria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Her first instinct was to inform Vargas, still hopeful that fatherhood would bring out the best in him. Vargas rushed to the hospital, arriving within minutes, his face a mixture of happiness and nervousness. He dropped to his knees, begging Maria for forgiveness, promising that he had changed and that their family would finally be happy. He pleaded with her to come home with him, swearing that everything would be different now. Against her parents' wishes, Maria believed him. She desperately wanted to give her children the family she had always dreamed of. And so after checking out of the hospital, she returned to the Vargas home with her 2 sons. Her parents were devastated by her decision. They saw through Vargas' empty promises, recognizing his actions as nothing more than manipulation. But Maria was blind to it, her hopes clouding her judgment. The situation led to a major argument between Maria and her parents. Torn between their love for their daughter and their fear of losing her completely, Maria's parents reluctantly accepted her choice. They did not want to alienate her or lose the chance to be involved in their grandchildren's lives, so they tried to support her as best they could, even though they knew the dangers she faced. For the first few months after their son was born, Vargas appeared to be the ideal husband and father. He spent most of his time at home, helping Maria with the newborn, taking on household chores, and doting on their baby boy. To Maria, this was everything she had dreamed of: a loving family, a supportive partner, and a stable home for her children. Although Vargas' relationship with Maria's older son remained distant, it wasn't hostile. He wasn't unkind to the boy, but his interactions with him were marked by a clear detachment. Vargas seemed uncomfortable playing the role of a stepfather, a role that Maria had hoped he would embrace with time. Nonetheless, his commitment to his new family and newfound stability, including getting an official job, gave Maria hope that he was making an effort to become a better man. For a while, even her skeptical relatives began to believe that Vargas had truly turned a corner. However, this period of calm was brief, a fleeting interlude in what was to become a relentless storm. The fragile peace in their household began to unravel, and Maria's happiness, which had once seemed within reach, quickly slipped through her fingers. The facade of family bliss shattered 1 year after their son's first birthday. Vargas' true nature resurfaced, more vicious and violent than ever before. One evening, without warning, he exploded in a fit of rage. All the suppressed anger, cruelty, and brutality he had concealed over the past year erupted in a terrifying outburst. He beat Maria mercilessly, leaving her with broken ribs and nearly blinding her in one eye. In sheer terror for her life, she fled to her parents' home, bruised and battered. Her parents, horrified by her injuries, once again implored her to go to the police. They knew this could no longer be ignored, but Maria, as always, refused. Despite the physical and emotional toll Vargas' violence had taken on her, she still clung to the belief that he could change. And, in a turn that shocked even her closest family members, a few days later when Vargas came begging for forgiveness, Maria returned home with him, convinced that they could restore the fleeting happiness they had once shared. Over the next several months, the violence escalated. Maria found herself in the hospital multiple times with serious injuries, fractures, bruises, and deep emotional scars. Yet, each time, she fabricated stories about her injuries, blaming them on accidents around the house to avoid involving the authorities. Her neighbors frequently heard the terrifying screams coming from the house, and had even witnessed Vargas violently attacking her. On more than one occasion, concerned residents were tempted to call the police, but Maria would always plead with them not to, fearing that such a move would only enrage Vargas further. People in the neighborhood were wary of Vargas, afraid of his unpredictable nature and the looming threat of violence he carried with him. It wasn't until November 2021, when the situation became truly unbearable, that Maria finally found the courage to take a stand. Fearing not only for her own life but also for the safety of her sons, she called the police. She could no longer live under the same roof as a man who had become a tyrant, a manipulator, and a sadistic abuser. Maria took her children and moved back into her parents' home. This time, she took legal steps to protect herself. She filed for and obtained a restraining order against Vargas, prohibiting him from coming near her or their children. The court order was supported by detailed medical reports documenting her numerous injuries, including bruises, contusions, and abrasions in various stages of healing, all of which pointed to long-term systematic abuse. Neighbors and relatives provided statements corroborating Maria's claims, describing the frequent beatings and verbal threats Vargas had made. With the restraining order in place, Maria hoped for some peace. But Vargas was not one to be easily deterred. He began to show up outside her parents' house, waiting for Maria to step outside so he could confront her. On several occasions, he demanded to speak with her, and each time, Maria quickly retreated inside, terrified of what he might do. Vargas' presence became so menacing that Maria refused to leave the house unless she was accompanied by family members, fearing that he might attack her in broad daylight. The tension escalated, and it became clear that Vargas was not going to give up easily. In early 2022, Maria filed for divorce, hoping to finally sever ties with Vargas and move on with her life. The divorce proceedings, however, were complicated. Vargas was determined to make the process as difficult as possible, particularly when it came to dividing their assets and negotiating custody of their son. Maria filed a lawsuit for domestic violence, armed with medical documentation and witness statements that painted a clear picture of the abuse she had endured. She hoped this would help her gain sole custody of her son, shielding him from the toxic influence of his father. But Vargas had his own plans. On March 3, 2022, despite the restraining order, he showed up at the house where Maria was staying with her parents. This time, he didn't come with threats or violence. Instead, he arrived calm and composed, asking politely to speak with Maria. Her parents were immediately on edge, sensing that something was wrong. They tried to turn him away, reminding him of the court order, but Vargas was insistent. He refused to leave without seeing Maria. Maria came out of the house, visibly tense but calm. Despite her family's protests, she insisted on speaking with him privately. What exactly he said to her during their brief conversation remains unclear, but Vargas was persuasive enough to convince Maria to leave with him. He told her they needed to settle some issues at their shared home and, playing on her emotions, expressed how much he missed their young son. Against her parents' vehement objections, Maria agreed to take the child along, assuring them that nothing bad would happen. Her conviction baffled them, but she was adamant. Reluctantly, they watched as she strapped their grandson into Vargas' car. That was the last time they saw Maria alive. The tension between Maria and Vargas quickly escalated during the car ride. According to neighbors who later reported what they had heard, the two were arguing even before they reached their house. Vargas' voice grew louder, peppered with foul language and threats as the couple arrived home. The neighbors, already used to the sound of their heated disputes, initially thought little of it. But this time was different. The argument didn't die down once they entered the house. It only intensified. Moments later, the shattering of furniture and smashing of dishes echoed from inside, followed by the unmistakable sound of their son's distressed crying and Maria's desperate cries for help. Panic spread through the neighborhood. One of the neighbors, living just across the street, rushed over to intervene, and others quickly called emergency services. Before anyone could reach the house, the front door swung open, and Vargas appeared in the doorway. His clothes were soaked in blood. In one hand, he held their crying child, and in the other, a blood-stained knife. His eyes were wide with fury, and his face was contorted with a mix of rage and cold detachment. The neighbor, horrified and unsure of what to do, backed away slowly, fearing for the child's life. Vargas didn't hesitate. He bolted toward his car, his speed and erratic behavior indicating that he had no intention of stopping. He shoved the boy into the passenger seat and sped off, tires screeching as he fled the scene. When the police arrived a few minutes later, a gruesome, chilling sight awaited them. Maria's lifeless body lay sprawled on the kitchen floor, drenched in her own blood. The brutality of the crime was evident from the first glance. Blood covered the walls, furniture, and even splattered across the ceiling, indicating a frenzied, violent attack. Forensic teams later counted 11 deep stab wounds on her body, concentrated mostly on her torso and hands, the latter bearing defensive wounds, proof that she had tried to fend off her attacker. 3 wounds were found on her neck and shoulder area, suggesting that Vargas had caught her off guard, attacking her from behind. Maria had likely tried to escape, but Vargas had chased her down, continuing his assault with chilling precision. The final blows were aimed at her chest, one of which struck near her heart, ultimately ending her life. There was no question about who had committed the murder. Vargas had fled the scene in broad daylight, taking his son with him, leaving behind a trail of evidence that pointed directly to him. The immediate concern for the police was locating him and ensuring the safety of the child. They feared that Vargas, in his panicked state, might attempt to cross the border into Nicaragua, a common route for those fleeing justice in the region. A manhunt was launched with urgency. Alerts with photographs of Vargas and his son were sent to every law enforcement agency, and all border checkpoints were placed on high alert. Hours after the crime, Vargas' abandoned car was discovered along a deserted road. Inside, investigators found traces of blood, and on the floor was the very knife used in the attack, complete with his fingerprints. It was clear that Vargas had tried to distance himself from the vehicle, knowing it would be easily identified. Authorities deduced that Vargas, now without his car, would be desperate to find another means of escape. Public transportation was not an option, as he was still in blood-stained clothing, which would attract immediate suspicion. The logical conclusion was that he had stolen another vehicle to continue his flight. As the search intensified, police received tips suggesting that Vargas had been spotted attempting to make his way toward the Nicaraguan border. With each hour that passed, the sense of urgency grew. The possibility of him vanishing into another country with the child was a terrifying prospect. Border patrols remained vigilant, and by late evening, their efforts paid off. Vargas was apprehended at a border checkpoint. He had tried to blend in, wearing a clean shirt he had somehow obtained, but he couldn't fully hide the bloodstains on his jeans and shoes. His son sat quietly in the back seat of a stolen car, unharmed but clearly traumatized. Vargas offered no resistance upon his capture. In a cold, calculated manner, he immediately requested a lawyer, displaying a chilling lack of remorse. In the stolen vehicle, police also found a firearm registered in Vargas' name, further proof of the lengths he was willing to go to maintain control and escape justice. The sight of him so calmly accepting his fate stood in stark contrast to the brutality he had inflicted upon Maria just hours earlier. The crime was classified as femicide, a gender-based crime that carries particularly harsh penalties in many Latin American countries. In cases of femicide, the perpetrator is often sentenced to life imprisonment due to the grave nature of the offense. From the beginning, all the evidence squarely pointed to Vargas as the culprit. The bloody knife found at the scene was covered in his fingerprints, and the bloodstains on his clothes further implicated him. Neighbors testified that besides Vargas, Maria, and their young child, no one else had entered the house on that fateful day. As the investigation progressed, it was also revealed that Vargas had a violent past, with previous charges for assault and bodily harm, which made the case against him appear even stronger. However, despite the overwhelming evidence, there was one complication. The only eyewitness to the horrific crime was the couple's 2.5-year-old son. This vulnerable and unreliable witness posed a challenge for the prosecution, and Vargas' defense team took full advantage of it. They devised a calculated legal strategy, aiming to blur the lines of responsibility. Vargas' defense claimed that Maria had attacked him first and that he had acted purely in self-defense. He maintained that Maria had flown into a rage during their argument, grabbing the knife first. Vargas argued that in the heat of the moment, while trying to defend himself, he panicked and unintentionally stabbed her. According to his account, he only realized what had happened when she stopped moving. In an attempt to further bolster his case, Vargas' family launched a smear campaign against Maria. They painted her as a bad mother and a difficult, unfaithful wife who had driven Vargas to his breaking point. His relatives insisted that Maria had constantly provoked him, and this had led to the deadly confrontation. This narrative, they argued, was the true version of events, that Vargas was a victim of his circumstances, caught in a tragic misunderstanding. Their defense team even suggested that the Casada family had ulterior motives, claiming that they sought to exploit the tragedy to take over Vargas' property and strip him of his right to see his child. In a disturbing twist, the defense's relentless campaign against the victim reached a new low when they petitioned for the exhumation of Maria's body. A week after she had been laid to rest, her body was exhumed to conduct an independent investigation. The goal was to prove that Maria had attacked Vargas first, potentially supporting his self-defense claim. However, this gruesome procedure only further discredited Vargas' version of events. The forensic experts refuted the defense's arguments, definitively proving that Maria had been struck from behind with the first 3 blows. The evidence made it clear Vargas had ambushed her, disproving any notion that she was the aggressor. The trial of Rovira Vargas began in March 2023, almost a year after the murder. The lengthy lead-up to the trial had given Vargas and his defense team plenty of time to craft their defense, but they were not prepared for the public outcry against them. Women's rights organizations and other activist groups rallied around the Casada family, holding protests and vigils demanding justice for Maria. As the trial drew near, the case garnered widespread attention, with crowds outside the courthouse calling for Vargas to be punished for his heinous crime. The trial was emotionally charged, especially for Maria's family. Her oldest son, now 9 years old, was able to provide critical testimony. He bravely recounted the cruelty his stepfather had shown toward his mother throughout their marriage. His testimony painted a picture of a household filled with violence, manipulation, and fear. As for the younger child, who had been present during the murder, the court was unable to call him to testify due to his age and the traumatic nature of the event. However, psychologists who had worked with the boy provided their findings to the court. They reported that the child had developed a strong fear of kitchen knives, screaming, "Daddy, don't," whenever he saw one. He had also expressed vague memories of his father hurting his mother and a haunting recollection that everything turned red. Although these accounts were not used as direct testimony, the psychological reports were submitted as evidence, offering a chilling glimpse into the child's memory of that day. The prosecution also called numerous witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and relatives, to testify against Vargas. Many of them recounted instances of Vargas' aggression toward Maria. Several testified to having seen bruises on her body on various occasions, and there were even police records from when Maria had sought help after particularly violent episodes. These records were key in showing a history of domestic abuse, which Vargas could no longer deny. Each testimony further solidified the portrayal of Vargas as a violent and manipulative man who had terrorized his wife for years. Despite the defense's attempts to deflect blame and vilify the victim, the overwhelming weight of evidence was too much to overcome. On May 15, 2023, the court found Rovira Vargas guilty of the premeditated murder of his wife, Maria Casada. His defense team's argument of self-defense was dismissed as unconvincing, and the smear campaign against Maria only solidified the prosecution's case that Vargas had acted with malicious intent. The brutality of the crime, combined with the history of domestic abuse, made it clear that this was not a crime of passion, but a calculated act of violence. Custody of Maria's 2 children was granted to her relatives, ensuring that they would grow up in a loving and supportive environment, far from the horrors of their past. Vargas was sentenced to 36 years in a maximum security prison, where he would serve his time with no chance of early release.
6054 Bluffs Drive was arrested for the murder of Ellie.
A monster with a sinister obsession meticulously planned his attacks, choosing victims who were playing sports alone, believing them to be ideal targets. His chilling stalks were methodical and calculated, each move carried out with a cold precision that left authorities baffled. The terror he inflicted was not only physical, but also psychological. The criminal hunted, stalking potential victims through the streets and carrying out horrific attacks. Only luck and quick reflexes saved women from a fate worse than nightmares. But one young woman found herself in his dark trap. Forensic experts were faced with the daunting task of unraveling the horror of her final moments, revealing a scene of intense suffering and cruelty. As the case progressed, each discovery added to the mounting horror, revealing a calculating, ruthless, and monstrous criminal whose actions defied comprehension. The dark, moonless night seemed to conspire with the silence. The forest, which was usually full of life, now held a secret that no one was supposed to know. A body was discovered in the bushes near a secluded park. A young girl, whose eyes had once glowed with life, were now closed forever. Her body was lifeless and tortured. On her neck were still visible the marks of a brutal struggle for life, and on her hands were traces of handcuffs, which seemed to have been put on not to restrain, but to inspire fear and horror. This was not just a brutal act of violence. It was a show of force and a chilling perversion of the body. The city of Minneapolis, in the northern United States, the largest city in the state of Minnesota and Hennepin County, is located on the banks of the Mississippi River. Founded in 1856, it is now home to approximately 450,000 people. Ellen Wyke was born in this wonderful place. Her family affectionately called her Ellie. At 23, she led a quiet life and lived with her parents, who were proud of her creative success. From an early age, she was fond of scrapbooking, attended dance classes, and was able to create elegant jewelry from ordinary metal things. Ellie loved music. She found solitude in it and inspiration for new ideas or jewelry. As a child, her family moved to Westchester, Ohio, where she continued her carefree childhood. Her curiosity was boundless, and she would do anything for a new discovery. This passion for exploring and learning new things did not diminish with age. Ellie enthusiastically grew plants, sewed hammocks, and, approaching the summer of 2018, earned her license in cosmetology. She dreamed of one day creating her own business and making the world just a little bit more beautiful. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until something happened that shattered her idyll. One ordinary day, she received an abusive message from an unknown person on social media. The sender's account was hidden, and this unexpected message was an ominous harbinger of the trouble that was looming over her life. Initially, Ellie didn't pay much attention to the offensive message, thinking it was just a bad joke. But soon, the situation began to deteriorate. Every day, she received similar messages on her social media pages. These threats were coming from different unknown accounts, and no amount of blocking helped. After deleting one stalker, she soon encountered a new one under a different nickname. A similar thing had happened to her about a year ago. But then, after a few blockers, the suspicious messages stopped. This time, the stalker was not going to back down. Using different platforms and devices, it was getting more and more frightening to Ellie, and she began to tell her family about her fears. But the worst was ahead. This bullying continued for a month, and then Ellie was sent a video taken from outside her own home, where she was filmed in the kitchen. The man filming this video stood outside the window and remained silent. In the next frames, he remained outside the window and began undressing and touching himself while watching the unsuspecting girl. This was no longer just an evil joke. It had turned into a real threat. The stalker knew where she lived, and that realization horrified Ellie, forcing her to go to the police. Her fears only intensified when she discussed what was happening with a friend named Hannah. She, too, was alarmed, realizing that this could all end in tragedy. Hannah urged Ellie to contact law enforcement, believing that only the police could keep her safe. Ellie, frightened and determined to act, followed her friend's advice and went to the police. In great detail, Ellie recounted what had happened, providing photos, the threatening messages she had received, and, most frightening of all, the video that had taken her by surprise. The detectives immediately asked the question, did she know her stalker? Ellie had only one guess. One of the accounts from which the threats came was called Mickey. That name didn't mean anything to her, but she had previously had a boyfriend named Michael, with whom they had broken up on a confrontational note a year ago. She didn't believe Michael could have been behind it. It was over. He'd stopped texting her a long time ago and had probably forgotten her by now. The police, however, didn't give her fears much credence. They advised Ellie to take self-defense courses and avoid nighttime walks. The situation did not seem to have caused them any serious concerns. Even when contacted again, it was clear that the stalker had not yet formally broken the law, so they could not take decisive action. Seeing no other option and realizing that she could not count on help from law enforcement, Ellie took the recommendations seriously. She enrolled in self-defense classes with her mother, hoping it would give her some sense of security. But even these measures could not protect her from the horror that was coming. However, all her efforts and precautions could not stop the intruder. The harassment and threats continued with frightening regularity. Investigators were powerless to determine the source of these messages. According to them, the perpetrator used a sophisticated encryption system, carefully covering his tracks. While there are ways to break such defenses, it requires significant time and resources. Given the weak interest of the police in the case, help from them seemed elusive. Ellie found herself alone in the face of a growing threat. She desperately hoped that it would all stop somehow, but fear gripped her more and more. The situation wasn't just not getting better, it was getting more and more threatening. Just a week after she went to the police, an unknown man showed up at her house twice. He was spotted by Ellie's mother, who ran outside both times but found no sign of him. The police also arrived, but each time left with nothing, having found nothing suspicious. The subtle but relentless psychological pressure of the stalker began to have a devastating effect on Ellie. She became increasingly afraid to be alone in the house. Friends, concerned about her condition, often came to support her by staying overnight in her room. However, the stalker seemed to have no problem accessing her home without leaving any visible trace. Ellie sank deeper and deeper into her anxiety and fear. Sleepless nights, constant tension, and the relentless anticipation of another attack. She was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, her life a never-ending struggle for safety and peace of mind. Ellie had barely had time to calm down before anxiety gripped her once again. Just a week later, she received a Snapchat message from a new account with the nickname Mickey. Her intuition immediately signaled that the name was too reminiscent of her ex, Michael Strauss. The puzzle quickly formed in her head, and she decided not to hesitate. She went to the police again, but everything followed a familiar pattern. The same officer, the same indifferent stare. He just shrugged his shoulders indifferently, making it clear that he was not interested in the story of the ex-boyfriend. The police just waved it off, saying they had more important things to do than get into matters of the heart. Ellie was beginning to lose faith in the protection of the law. Remembering how her relationship with Michael had begun, she realized that her anxiety was not unfounded. At 17, she had become infatuated with a guy who shared her passion for art, music, and rowdy parties. However, romance quickly gave way to grim realities. Michael turned out to be not just a romantic, but a manipulator with dark tendencies. He insisted on role-playing, which did not fit her understanding of a normal relationship. Over time, Ellie realized that Michael was a man who was not to be trifled with and decided to end the relationship before it went too far. Michael's reaction was not long in coming. He reacted with cold fury and began stalking her, leaving ominous messages. Ellie had to change her phone number to get rid of his attention. At the time, it helped and everything really calmed down, but the calm didn't last long. And now this Snapchat nickname has awakened her fears again, like a shadow from the past. July 28, 2018 was an evening that fundamentally changed Ellen White's life. At that time, the girl was texting with Nate, her boyfriend, who proposed to spend the night together. Ellie, depressed by fears and anxiety, did not dare to leave the house in the dark. Nate promised to come over and stay the night without a cell phone so as not to disturb her. He knocked on the door, and she let him in. But that night, Ellie was very tired and asked Nate to leave early. Ellie planned to go to bed alone that night, not leaving her friends at home as she had been doing for the past few months. She carefully locked the doors and closed the windows, a ritual that had become her only way to feel protected. But that night, the night she should have felt relieved, her sense of security was cheated. The night passed, and Ellie disappeared, leaving behind only worry and fear. When her family was unable to contact her, her mother panicked and called the police. Ellie's car remained parked outside the house, as did her phone, which showed no activity. The police found no trace of her presence in the house, no messages or bank card activity. The cops immediately set out to analyze the latest data from Ellie's phone and soon found correspondence with Nate. But upon further verification, it turned out that the number was registered in another city and had no connection to her boyfriend's real data. Nate, fortunately, had a solid alibi confirmed by other sources. This fake account was so convincing that Ellie, unaware of the deception, revealed her plans. Now her fears and concerns became reality, and she was trapped in a web of lies and manipulation. The number through which Ellie was contacted was purchased through a third-party website, making it difficult to immediately identify the buyer. It wasn't until days later that it was revealed that her ex-boyfriend, Michael Strauss, was behind the purchase. Unfortunately, even after 2 weeks of investigation, there was no information on the whereabouts of the missing woman. However, police were able to establish that Michael had a long list of crimes, including public indecency, sale and use of illegal substances, identity fraud, and burglary. As police began to dig deeper, shocking information about Michael Strauss came to light. His criminal activity stretched back nearly a decade, and in June 2015, he was charged with indecent exposure, which caused the court to question his mental health. Michael was sent to compulsory treatment, which seemed intended to limit his potential for further crimes. But in reality, his manipulations only expanded. Michael began creating fake accounts and messengers on social networks through which he stalked and harassed girls. These messages came from his hometown, where the last number from which Michael contacted Ellie on that fateful night was registered. The number was deactivated immediately after her disappearance. A month after Ellie's disappearance, on August 24, her body was found in a field near town. The remains were found on a road in Butler County, a few kilometers from the township. Police immediately assumed it was the body of a stalker's victim, but because of the horrific degree of decomposition, identification was difficult, necessitating further examination. The victim's remains were found on the side of the road, wrapped in a blanket tied with duct tape, as if the perpetrator was trying to cover up the evidence of his atrocity. The deceased had a plastic bag over her head, presumably the weapon of the crime. The forensic expert had a painstaking job ahead of him. The degree of decomposition of the body made it difficult both to identify the victim and to establish the exact cause of her death. The forensic examination revealed evidence of severe torture. Clearly tortured and abused, the girl had been severely beaten and tied up. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation. The killer put a bag over her head and tied it tightly around her neck, leaving the victim with no chance of escape. The perpetrator didn't seem to be trying to hide his actions. Ellie's body was found just a short walk across a field from the home of 29-year-old Michael Strauss. The gruesome discovery shocked the public and journalists who followed the search for Ellie with bated breath. Family and friends believed to the last that she could be rescued, hoping that she was being forcibly held by the perpetrator and was alive. But sadly, that was not the case. At 4 a.m., the call from the police station came as a heavy blow to the family. The bad news of the final end of their hopes drowned them in grief. The next morning, Michael Strauss was arrested. His detention was a significant event that drew public attention. Police officers struggled to keep the crime scene secret from prying eyes. The area was cordoned off, and forensic experts worked to collect evidence. Drones captured every movement around the suspect's home, and Michael was taken into custody with bail set at $4 million. From the beginning, he was considered a particularly dangerous criminal. At the same time, Michael Strauss's home was searched, and police officers scrutinized the area where Ellie's body was found. DNA samples matching Michael's were found on her remains, confirming his involvement in the crime. During the search, the suspect's computer and cell phone were seized. Their analysis provided disturbing details. Many accounts and phone numbers purchased over the internet belonged to Michael. He changed them regularly to continue to harass and intimidate Ellie after each blocking. Analyzing the data from Michael's computer revealed his dark interests. He actively sought information on murder methods, especially strangulation, sentences, and state laws. He paid special attention to criminals known for their violent crimes. The last request was made on July 18, just 10 days before Ellie's disappearance. In the days that followed, he also researched topics related to surviving in maximum security prisons and the laws of the criminal underworld, indicating his awareness of and preparation for future consequences. Shockingly, he also tried to cover his tracks by studying ways to delete data without the possibility of recovery. In between preparing his crimes, Michael reviewed violent material. Some of the requests uncovered by detectives were so shocking that their contents were decided not to be released to the public. Michael presented himself as an extremely dangerous criminal whose actions went beyond mere stalking. His collection included videos and photos of people jogging in secluded parks. It seems that Michael chose his victims among those who regularly exercised alone, and each of them could be the next target. Unfortunately, Ellie fell into a death trap that Michael had carefully prepared. The psychiatrists working with Michael were wary, but believed that his behavior did not necessarily indicate clear danger. They argued that some maniacs might enjoy simply observing women without directly attacking them. However, this view soon collided with reality. Disturbing evidence emerged that confirmed the worst fears. Michael repeatedly pursued potential victims by car and even committed several assaults. Fortunately, the women were able to escape and avoid further injury. The need to verify new data and expand the list of his crimes became more and more obvious. During the search, a picture of a map on Michael's cell phone was found, marked near the location where Ellie's body was found. This raised serious suspicions, but no new evidence was found when the place was checked. After his arrest, Michael displayed a strange calmness. He tried to justify his internet inquiries and found materials as preparing a script for his horror movie. According to him, he intended to create his own masterpiece, and his pursuit of Ellie was part of an attempt to get into character and write as realistic a script about a maniac as possible. The photos, he claimed, were taken to assess angles before filming. Michael Strauss insisted that the actions were all part of a psychological game he thought was harmless, and that he did not warn Ellie of his intentions to capture her sincere emotions. The prosecutor's office, however, had a different point of view. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence in favor of the prosecution was the discoveries made in Michael's room. Among the items seized were Ellie's driver's license, a strand of her hair, and a pink necklace. Ellie's parents identified the items and confirmed that she always wore the jewelry and never took it off. Investigators concluded that the items were likely collected as trophies, a characteristic of serial offenders who keep victims' belongings to savor the memories of their crimes. During interrogations, Michael displayed surprising smugness and arrogance, as if enjoying his role as the protagonist of a drama. His attempts to throw the police off balance were obvious, and he showed no remorse for his actions. Instead, Michael continued to weave incredible excuses, trying to convince investigators that he had no idea why Ellie had been murdered or why her body had been found near his home. He claimed that the items found in his possession, a driver's license and a necklace, were left by Ellie as a token of remembrance of their relationship. However, this explanation seemed fictitious, as the girl never removed her jewelry and her driver's license could not have been in Michael's possession at the time. It was a clear sign of deception. When the investigators changed the tactics of interrogation and began to press him, Michael began to give contradictory testimony. He admitted that the incident was an accident and, according to him, arranged with Ellie to shoot an erotic video with elements of torture for his movie, offering her several $1,000s. He claimed that she agreed to the filming. According to his version, when he arrived at her house, Ellie came out to him wrapped in a blanket so as not to attract the attention of neighbors, and they went to Michael's house together. There, Michael allegedly started filming, and they went down to the basement. He handcuffed Ellie, he said, and began to abuse and torture her. In the course of this, he claimed, Ellie accidentally choked to death because of the bag over her head. Michael continued to insist that the filming was consensual and that he himself didn't realize how Ellie died. Afterward, he allegedly deleted the footage and threw away the memory card. Despite the detailed description, Michael's version sounded implausible and raised many questions. The very fact that he continued to claim for so long that everything was consensual seemed unlikely and only emphasized his attempts to avoid responsibility. During the search of Michael Strauss's home, the police discovered a sinister handcuffed bed in the basement that served as a grim testament to the horrific events. The place, full of an intimidating atmosphere, was thoroughly investigated by forensic experts. Extracted drops of blood and strands of hair were identified by DNA tests as belonging to Ellie. This evidence made Michael's version of Ellie's voluntary participation in the film completely unbelievable. Law enforcement officials did not believe the suspect's story that Ellie had allegedly agreed to participate in the filming. They knew that Michael had pretended to be Ellie's new boyfriend to lure her out of the house. The family also found it unbelievable that Ellie could have agreed to such filming voluntarily. It was obvious that the girl had been the victim of a kidnapping and brutal abuse, brought to a fatal end. Michael's description of Ellie's last minutes of life, full of horror and pain, sounded so cold-blooded that it was as if he was describing a normal working day. Following Michael's arrest, police began receiving numerous reports from witnesses. They also received calls from victims who were convinced that Michael had been involved in a number of other crimes. Despite the hard work of the police, it took the help of FBI agents to uncover all of Michael's criminal activities. The agents had to sort through extensive digital evidence and build a psychological profile of the perpetrator. As a result, the charges against Michael included counts of aggravated murder, tampering with evidence, theft, and abuse of a body. The evidence reached 800 pages, each of which was shown to the jury during the trial. Nevertheless, the defense presented its version of events. Michael Strauss's lawyer insisted that 23-year-old Ellie, of her own volition, went to the filming fully aware of all the risks and dangers. He argued that the murder was accidental and not premeditated. The defense attorney also focused on the suggestion that Ellie may have suffered from depression caused by a possible drug overdose. However, a toxicology report showed that no drugs or alcohol were found in the victim's blood at the time of death. This finding made the defense attorney's argument of depression merely a misplaced attempt to shift blame. For Ellie's family, such an assumption was insulting, given that her troubled state was the result of Michael's longtime stalking behavior. As the preliminary hearing drew to a close, Michael suddenly made a shocking announcement. He pleaded guilty.
I stand here before you today, not to make excuses or to beg for.
This admission came as a relief to the family of the deceased, saving them from having to listen to the details of how their daughter died. However, the admission also meant that the charges were revised, and at least 6 counts from the original list of charges were dropped as part of the deal. This caused disappointment for many, as the perpetrator received a lighter sentence. During the sentencing, Strauss addressed Ellie's family with a remorseful apology. "Please believe that I never meant to hurt anyone. If there was a chance to bring Ellie back, I would trade places with her that very second." These words were seen as manipulative and devoid of sincerity, while Strauss's mother, who later reached out to Ellie's family, expressed sincere regret, admitting that she did not expect her son to become such a monster. The prosecutor's office demanded the maximum penalty for Michael, while the defense counsel asked for a reduced sentence based on the client's admission of guilt and remorse. Michael Strauss heard his sentence in silence, which was only occasionally interrupted by barely restrained sobs in the courtroom. Life in prison with parole after 15 years, plus a year and a half for threatening and harassment, and another year for abuse of the body. The judge ruled that the sentences should run consecutively, as if weighing each of the defendant's sins. Arguing his decision, he said that despite the heinousness of the crimes, Strauss deserved a chance for a retrial. This gave him the phantom possibility of leaving prison in 2036. If conditional release is not granted, then the next attempt will be in 2041. The reaction of the victim's family was immediate and furious. For them, the verdict was a blow. The possibility that their daughter's killer would one day be free again seemed to them a mockery of justice. They were determined that they would attend every parole board hearing, fighting to ensure that the perpetrator would never leave prison. Their pain and anger turned into a goal: to keep Michael from returning to society and to protect others from the horror he brought into their lives. We will also note a very important point in this matter. After the accused was sent to jail, Ellie's family and friends began to fight for justice. They appealed to the prosecutor's office, demanding punishment for the police officers who, in their opinion, failed to protect the girl despite her desperate pleas for help. An internal investigation soon began, which revealed blatant violations. One of the investigators refused to accept information properly and failed to conduct a thorough investigation to verify Ellie's words. That very moment was the beginning of the end of Ellie's life. As a result, the officer was suspended, but nothing could bring Ellie's life back. Not long after his time behind bars, Michael told a cellmate shocking some of his dark secrets from his past. It turned out that 23-year-old Ellie was far from his only victim. In his jail cell, Michael apparently decided that honesty was the best way to pique his interest. He recounted how he dealt with another girl named Shelley, whom he stalked and tormented in the same gruesome pattern as Ellie. They say he dumped her body in a creek where no one would look, and police were never able to find evidence to back up what he said. In January 2018, the station received a report from a girl who was being chased by a certain suspicious man wearing a black hooded sweatshirt and a mask. The creep grabbed her by the head in a park where she was exercising and dragged her into the bushes, demanding that she shut up. Luckily, she managed to fight back and escape. This incident no doubt set everyone on edge, but the results of the inspection were not particularly successful. It was unclear whether or not the man was connected to Michael. In August 2011, 22-year-old Kathleen Markham went missing in Fairfield, Ohio, right after a party where Michael was in the picture with her and her boyfriend. 2 years later, in 2013, her remains were found in Cedar Grove, Indiana. Police are still trying to find out if Michael Strauss was connected to these horrific cases from the past. In a suburban town known for its peace and tranquility, a shocking crime occurs that shatters that tranquility and causes chilling fear. The sudden disappearance of a woman sets off a chain of events that leaves everyone horrified. The woman, once a well-known figure in the community, vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that will haunt people for a long time. But one crisp spring morning, local authorities were alerted to a disturbing discovery. The body of a young woman had been found behind a kiosk in a remote area, marked by a series of strange and horrifyingly brutal wounds. The investigation quickly uncovered disturbing details about the woman's personal life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a web of deception involving numerous secret connections and a complex history that painted a grim picture of her true character. The case took a dramatic turn when toxicology reports and forensic evidence began to reveal the extent of the abuse inflicted on the victim. Tragedy struck the Italian village of Teramo, shocking everyone in the area where nothing foreshadowed the impending disaster. A young woman, Melania Rea, whose life seemed perfect, disappeared from view in an instant. The horrific secrets of her family were eventually revealed when what initially seemed like an accidental disappearance turned into a terrible crime. Her husband, Salvatore Parolisi, was a war veteran with a brilliant career and an impeccable reputation. He seemed the perfect father and husband. But behind the closed doors of their home lurked a brutal truth. Treason, intrigue, and hatred were undermining their marriage, turning Melania's life into a nightmare. For years, she fought to keep her family together for the sake of their young daughter, Victoria, unaware that this decision would lead to her death. Melania's body was found in the woods with multiple stab wounds. Her underwear was down, giving the impression of a staged murder. Investigators plunged into a maelstrom of lies and betrayal, discovering the horrifying truth when they learned that Salvatore had a mistress. This tragic story of betrayal, hatred, and the desire for freedom will remain in the memory of the residents of the Italian village of Teramo for many years, reminding them that even the most prosperous family can hide terrible and deadly secrets. Let's take a closer look at this tragic story and try to figure out what actually happened. Melania Rea, a beautiful woman who was an instructor in an infantry regiment in Italy at the time of the tragedy. She was married to Salvatore Parolisi, and together they raised a 1-year-old daughter named Victoria. On April 18, 2011, at about 3 p.m., a terrible tragedy occurred. At that time, the family lived near the San Marco Plateau in a small village called Ospitia, Italy. It was a normal spring afternoon, but cooler than usual for these places. That's why the tourists who walked along the trail under the mountainsides didn't see the flowers that usually cover the plateau, as the snow had only recently melted. However, there was already a bar and small stores operating here where you could walk around and enjoy the views. On this day, a man with a child showed up. He drove up in his personal vehicle and stopped in the parking lot. He went into a small bar and used the restroom, then started asking all the locals if they had seen his wife. Her name was Melania. The woman had recently become a mother and was missing. She was a sporty beauty with long dark hair and was 28 years old. In the man's arms was a little girl who turned out to be his daughter. At that time, there were no women at all among the customers in the bar. Upon learning that no one similar to her had been seen here, the man became visibly nervous, pacing back and forth. He became more and more anxious until he cried, lamenting that his wife had been taken from him and kidnapped. Everyone present decided to support the father and his child and help in the search. People went out on the terrace and walked around the path leading from the parking lot to the bar, hoping to see any sign of the young woman or any indication of where she had gone. However, nothing could be seen. The stranger said that he had been with his spouse in the morning. After lunch, they arrived at the park where the man was playing with his daughter near the swings located on the playground. The spouse was going to step away briefly to buy coffee and go to the bathroom. However, the woman did not return, and the husband literally felt that something was wrong. Of course, the first thing he did was try to call his wife. The young father made numerous calls in the last 15 minutes, but to no avail. The missing woman's cell phone was not answering. The man was sure that his wife was kidnapped by intruders in a passing car, as there was a rather busy road. The frightened man did not leave and did not calm down. The longer he stayed in the bar and talked to its owner, named Giovanna, the more strange things she noticed. First, he was too lightly dressed for a walk on such a chilly day. Second, he barely watched his 1-year-old daughter while he lamented the disappearance of his wife. The girl was wandering between visitors, hungry and cold. But the father ignored all these facts as he continued to sob and tell his story of his wife's disappearance. At exactly 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, the phone rang in the local Carabinieri department. Giovanna, the bar owner, called the police. When the man came out of the bar, she reported that a man was here who had not been able to find his spouse for over an hour and claimed that she might have been kidnapped. He was here with a young child. The girl was just over a year old and her father was clearly not himself. When the girl's father showed up at the bar, the owner immediately handed him the phone to talk to the Carabinieri, one of Italy's police forces. The agitated man gave the dispatcher some data about himself and his missing spouse. It was known that she had a hernia and the woman might have gotten sick at the foot of the mountains. He told the same story as the other bar patrons and emphasized that his wife had disappeared after stepping away from the bar and had not yet reappeared. He spoke very quietly, swallowing his words, slurring his words in almost every sentence, alternating all of this with long periods of silence. The policeman had to repeat almost every question several times. The man began to cry on the phone and finally gave the name of the missing woman. Her name was Carmela. He misspoke and quickly corrected himself and said that the woman preferred to be called Melania. The man also introduced himself, saying that his name was Salvatore Parolisi. When law enforcement officers arrived on the scene, the man repeated his story again, adding the morning's events. The couple had health problems, so they were forced to go to a nearby hospital. On their way home, they decided to stop for a walk and coffee. At that moment, Salvatore stayed at the playground with his daughter, where she was riding on the swings. When his wife didn't return, he got worried but couldn't reach her on the phone. This was very suspicious because the connection was good, and the woman always answered the phone or returned his calls. But this time, her behavior was uncharacteristic. She just kept quiet. Then Salvatore got to the bar where his spouse was supposed to go. Here, he questioned everyone there about whether they had seen a woman similar in description to his spouse, but no one had seen her there. The longer there was no news, the more despair encompassed Salvatore. Suddenly, the man became angry as police officers questioned him in detail about what his spouse looked like and what had happened in the last minutes before she left. According to Salvatore, everything was fine. She just wanted to use the restroom and nothing pretended trouble on the spot. The identity of the complainant was confirmed, and the Carabinieri started a check. First of all, they conducted a rapid analysis of the man's telephone data, looking at his interests and inquiries of the last few days in order to assess the applicant's trustworthiness. This is how the police became aware of Salvatore's background. Salvatore Parolisi was born in the province of Naples, Italy, on August 28, 1987. At the time of his spouse's disappearance, he was 33 years old. Together with his daughter, they lived in Felina. The missing Maria Rea was born on May 24, 1982, in another small town in the province of Naples. Both were members of the armed forces, so the Carabinieri immediately contacted the headquarters of the military unit to which the defendants in this case were assigned. The first strange factor was that the woman was missing in such an open area. There were no difficult trails or wooded routes, and the foothills of the mountains hadn't even had time to grow flowers. You could see a large area from the playground. It was strange that the woman was able to escape unnoticed or was kidnapped in broad daylight without leaving any witnesses to support this. In addition to the Carabinieri, Salvatore's friend, who was also a police officer, came. He primarily wanted to help the shocked man cope with the child. At this time, Salvatore was very agitated, literally trembling, and constantly banging his fists on the bar, feeling powerless. Salvatore could not control himself and, even more so, was unable to cope with the child. Finally, the police collected all the necessary information, after which they released the young father with his daughter. A little later, the relatives of the missing woman were notified about the incident. They immediately went to the place to find out all the circumstances themselves and help in the search for Melania. When communicating with the police, Salvatore behaved quite strangely. As a military man, he perfectly understood the importance of providing the most accurate information to the police officers to help find his wife as soon as possible. However, instead, he evaded answers and delayed the process in every way possible. Even to find out the missing woman's cell phone number, detectives had to repeat the question 3 or 4 times before the man finally provided the necessary data. The cops wanted to track Melania's cell phone to find out her approximate location and trace her route. In fact, the spouse was not that difficult to find if she had actually left or been caught here by some intruder. There were only 3 fairly busy paths between the bar and the playground. One of the trails was just over 100 meters long, and most of it was viewed from one of the video cameras mounted on the kiosk. The second was much longer, about 1 mile long, and this trail passed by a local war memorial that is often visited by people. The third route was about 2 miles long and was also well screened on all sides by cameras. But surprisingly, no one saw anything, and the cameras did not capture the woman either. All this was strange and raised questions. Was the woman even at this location that day? According to the findings, the missing woman's cell phone was last active at 2:45 p.m. on the day just before her disappearance. That was not far from where they had come with their husband and child. None of this provided any additional information, and Salvatore's silence only made matters worse. The only thing that could help with the search was the National Mountain Rescue Service. Specialists were called in to assist in the search and arrived on the scene with equipment and a 14-year-old search dog that was a master at locating people in the most difficult of conditions. The dog's sense of smell was so acute that the animal could pick up a trail up to 20 days after it had been left. The animal quickly oriented itself and headed down the paved path toward the monument. Here, the trail broke off, as if the woman had gotten into a car and disappeared. However, Salvatore later said that they were here a little over a week ago, so there was a possibility that the dog smelled old traces of the missing woman, or she was really kidnapped and taken away in a car. The police officers then went with Salvatore to the station for questioning. Here, the man again revealed all the details of the past day preceding the disappearance of Melania. According to him, at about 11:30 a.m., his wife was examined by a physiotherapist. They were in the supermarket and later went to the San Marco clinic. Here, the woman was examined and found to have an inguinal hernia. After lunch, they stopped by home, changed clothes, and set out for a walk with their daughter. According to Salvatore, they had been here 3 or 4 times in the last month. It was one of the family's favorite and frequented walking spots. As such, he was very familiar with the area, especially given the military man's photographic memory. The last visit took place less than 10 days before Melania Rea went missing on April 10th. According to Salvatore, at that time, they came here with his spouse alone and visited a bar. After receiving all the information, the Carabinieri let the man go home as there was nothing to show him at this point. The main version of the investigators was kidnapping, given the information that was obtained with the help of a search dog. The woman approached the main road and her trail broke off, as if she had been kidnapped and taken away. All indications were that she could indeed have been caught and forcibly dragged into an automobile. In May, Salvatore came to television to tell his story. Here, he added more details to it, saying that he and his wife had had a small picnic near the war memorial and were resting there on the day of the incident. In general, the place was not at all suitable for such entertainment. There was dense vegetation and not even a single bench. But Salvatore's words partly confirmed the behavior of the search dog. In addition, the husband provided information about the clothes and accessories that were on his wife at the time of her disappearance. Here, new strangeness surfaced. According to the husband, the missing woman did not have with her a purse with personal belongings. She was dressed in casual clothes and had some gold jewelry with her. However, it was completely incomprehensible how such a responsible woman could go on a long trip with her child without any preparation and without taking her purse with her. She didn't even have any money or cigarettes, which she smoked all the time. Investigators were particularly interested in how she could have gone to a bar to buy her spouse coffee if she didn't have any money on her. There were more and more contradictions and inconsistencies in Salvatore's words. Presumably, he was lying. Given the growing number of suspicions, detectives again turned to the husband of the missing woman to learn about their relationship and the atmosphere in the family. According to the man, there was a strong bond between them. They would sometimes argue about various issues if they couldn't come to a consensus. However, this never escalated into conflicts. In general, they had a great, strong family, which was confirmed by close friends and relatives. Therefore, the man was released again. After Salvatore's interrogation, the missing woman's relatives arrived in town the next day. They checked into a modest condominium near Salvatore's home. They went to the police station immediately, although they were very tired. The family was interested in the status of the investigation and the detectives' findings so far. Meanwhile, the family members were willing to provide any details that might help in the initial search for Melania. As it turned out, the missing woman had 2 phones, which her husband, which was strange, did not report. One of them she used to talk to her husband and friends, as the SIM card had a more favorable tariff. The other number was used to communicate with her mother and immediate family. At 1:40 p.m., on the day of the disappearance, the woman's mother-in-law called the second number, and they talked for about 5 minutes, during which Melania talked about the walk and other events of that day. According to her, the young family was going to San Marco to take a walk in the fresh air. They had little time for this, however, as about 4 p.m., the whole family had to attend the baptism of their friend's child. This dialogue ended at 1:45 p.m. in the afternoon. There was no further conversation. The police noticed even more inconsistencies in Salvatore's story. He answered all questions with one-word answers, constantly repeating everything the police officers already knew at that point. The detectives had unanswered questions they didn't understand. Why did the child stay with her father? Why didn't the mother take the girl with her when she went out for coffee? Why did they swing for half an hour without stopping? The drive from home to this place took less than 10 minutes. Did Melania suddenly have the urge to go to the bathroom in that short time? And more importantly, where did she go next? The missing woman's relatives moved into Salvatore's house. They were in constant communication with him about what had happened, but the man was not much of a talker. Mostly, he was evasive and looked upset. Relatives supported the man as best they could, helping him cope with his anxiety and looking after the child. At the same time, The husband kindly gave them his bedroom with a large bed to make the wife's relatives comfortable. On April 19th, the whole town already knew what had happened. The disappearance of a woman here was something unthinkable, as the suburb was one of the quietest and most peaceful corners in the region. Despite the police's suspicions about the missing woman's husband, he had never been in trouble with the law before. Salvatore continued to appear on various television programs, talking about the tragedy he was experiencing. In parallel, the investigators' questions for him only piled up. They decided to shed light on what had happened that morning by going through the main suspect's cell phone. The Carabinieri found that the phone was on from 7 to 9 a.m., but then it was turned off until 6 p.m. that morning. Salvatore also stopped by San Marco Park again on April 19th, where investigators and search teams were working. However, the man showed no interest in the progress of the search and its results. Instead, he simply returned the sweatshirt to the owner of the bar, which he had borrowed on the day of Melania's disappearance. He then left immediately on the pretext that he had to go to work. His behavior raised certain questions and concerns for the detectives. When checking Salvatore's cell phone, the Carabinieri discovered something interesting. It turned out that he had been actively communicating with a girl named Ludovica for the last month. There were thousands of messages and calls that were made almost daily. It turned out that he had been having a romantic liaison with her on the side. He fell in love with Ludovica back in September 2009. The relationship between them continued until May 2011, even after the disappearance of the man's wife. It has been established that back in the summer of 2009, Melania learned about the adventures of her husband on the side and was furious. She moved in with her parents in anticipation of childbirth, as she was pregnant with a daughter at the time. The father-to-be seemed to be completely unaffected by this. Salvatore continued to court Ludovica, who worked in their military unit at that time. The girl was 27 years old. Later, the couple did reconcile for the sake of the baby, and Melania returned home. However, his affair on the side continued. The husband constantly rented a studio apartment where he saw his mistress. After training, she was sent to Rome. But even there, their relationship did not end. The man used almost every minute to get away from his wife and talk to his mistress on the phone, which he was literally obsessed with. Judging from their dialogue, it was obvious that Ludovica wanted more than a phone or long-distance relationship, but apparently, the obstacle to that was Melania. In the last months before the disappearance of his wife, there was discord in the relationship between the lovers because of his wife. Ludovica wanted Salvatore to divorce and be with her. The man, in every possible way, delayed it, referring to the fact that the divorce process had already begun, but lawyers needed a lot of time to collect and prepare documents. In fact, Melania insisted on preserving the relationship. Back in 2010, she was quite categorical in this regard. During this period, she just learned about the fact that her husband continued to meet with his mistress. However, the spouse was determined to keep the family together. Melania tried to blackmail Salvatore, saying that if they divorced and she publicized the relationship on the side, her husband would have problems at work. After that, he got scared and took a break from communicating with Ludovica. It seemed to have worked. His wife was convinced that everything was back to normal and that what had happened was just a passing crush caused by stagnation in the relationship. However, at this stage, the confrontation entered the mistress, who did not plan to give in. Ludovica insisted on a renewed relationship with Salvatore, wanting him to leave the family for her. The man was literally torn between the two women. The situation went so far that on April 19th, Salvatore was supposed to come to his mistress in Rome to meet her parents, so they could be free to build their own family. The problem turned out to be that his wife wasn't even aware of this. At the same time, he was supposed to be spending the vacations with his family, Melania, and his daughter. Somehow, just a day before the event, the spouse had gone missing. It all seemed too suspicious. Of course, as love triangles rarely end well. When Salvatore first came to work after his wife's disappearance, management suggested organizing a rescue operation by assembling a squad of soldiers and using machinery. However, the man was extremely calm and was sure that this was not necessary. Allegedly, his wife left him because of resentment, so there was no need to organize any operations. Salvatore then deleted his account on social networks through which he communicated with Ludovica. With the new circumstances, the police got the real motive for the crime. By now, the critical period during which the chance of finding the missing person alive is maximized had passed. The Carabinieri seriously believed that they would never find Melania alive again. In addition, the search dog involved in the investigation was ineffective. It could smell fresh footprints, and the odor of the missing person left 10 days before the disappearance with the same intensity. Against this background, it was impossible to say what it smelled. To get more information, investigators traveled to Salvatore Parolisi's home. On April 23rd, police received a call from an unknown male. He identified himself as a mushroom hunter who said he had discovered a gruesome find: the body of a woman 10 miles from Felina. When Carabinieri arrived on the scene, they found the body of a young woman who looked like Melania. Her pants and underwear had been pulled down in what looked like a staged rape. Investigators were stunned when her husband refused to show up for identification without any explanation. Instead, a family friend showed up and confirmed that Melania, 28, was the person whose body had been found. A vendor from a nearby stall also confirmed the identity of the deceased, as the local military often held training sessions there, and they were his regular customers. During the autopsy, forensic experts found multiple stab wounds on the victim's body, similar to those from a small blade. Most of the blows were to the head and neck, and there were also chest injuries and several defensive wounds. Melania had not been raped. A large amount of evidence was collected around the body. Among the items found were the victim's mobile phone, a lighter with traces of blood, a bottle of water, and car tracks. However, the most important piece of evidence was a grocery store receipt from the morning of April 18th. In addition, insulin syringes and tourniquets were found. One might have suspected that the deceased had been victimized by people addicted to substances or had used them herself. This speculation was partly confirmed by the symbols carved on the victim's body. Some of the wounds seemed to form crosses, swastikas, and other symbols, as well as something from the realm of satanic rituals. But detectives were sure it was a false trail. Toxicological examination showed that there was no alcohol or illegal substances in the body of the deceased. Carabinieri learned from Melania's husband another strange coincidence. A couple of days before the disappearance of the woman, in this very place, behind the kiosk where the body was found, she and her husband had an intimate relationship. Somehow this became known to the mistress, and she was furious. She was little bothered by the fact that her lover had been widowed under strange circumstances. She was annoyed by the lies since the man repeatedly swore to her that he no longer had intimacy with his spouse. In any case, this connection could justify almost any traces of the main suspect on the victim's body. That could be found by the police at the scene of the tragedy. There were many wounds, which made the story of intimacy behind the kiosk less plausible. It was snowing and quite cold that day, which was not favorable for an intimate liaison in nature. In addition, Melania was known to be in pain at the time due to an inguinal hernia, making her participation in such an activity unlikely. Salvatore probably wanted to build an alibi in this way, knowing that the police might find his DNA on the dead woman's body as evidence of his involvement in the massacre of his own wife. Of course, this was all just speculation that needed to be proven. Law enforcement officers examined the entire area near the body with luminol to look for the slightest drops of blood. They were able to find plenty of evidence, including a partial boot print. In order to get a new lead on the perpetrator, it was necessary to determine who was in the area between April 17th and April 20th, as that was the period determined to be the time of the victim's death. As it turned out, soldiers from the regiment where the widower and his wife were serving were in the area on those days. The police interviewed those of them who might have seen something on that day. In fact, it turned out that it was the soldiers who had left some of the evidence behind, namely a bottle of water, a receipt from the store, and a boot print. This set the detectives back, as most of the evidence was not relevant to the case at all. Also, the troopers didn't see anyone suspicious that day, and according to them, there wasn't a body there yet. Investigators decided to take a closer look at Ludovica's mistress. They found out that on April 18th and 19th, she did not leave the barracks, so she could not be at the scene of the crime. She had a reliable alibi. Ludovica also provided valuable information, saying that on April 17, 2011, she communicated with Salvatore about their relationship. On that day, he told Ludovica that his spouse was cheating on him. This lie may have been told in order to stage a conflict and create an alibi. Going deeper into the details of Salvatore's extramarital affairs, it turned out that Ludovica was not the only one with whom he had an affair. Previous relationships had also been with girl soldiers. However, Ludovica knew about it but did not give it any importance. In total, it was revealed that the amorous widower had relationships with at least 23 women on the side. The man knew that the police disclosed this information and feared that they might consider it as a motive for reprisals against his wife. To gather evidence of the prime suspect's involvement in the crime, detectives installed a wiretap in his vehicle and also eavesdropped on phone conversations. This provided valuable information, as Salvatore repeatedly organized monologues in his car, discussing the news about the murder of his wife, which gave reason to suspect his involvement in the massacre of the young woman. Nevertheless, the detectives had yet to figure out who had last seen Melania alive and when. Strangely, of the 37 people walking in the park at the time of the disappearance, no one saw Melania or the father and child on the swings. After obtaining permission to use luminol to examine the suspect's car, the experts found bloodstains inside. After the samples were submitted to the laboratory, the analysis confirmed the investigators' suspicions. Melania's blood was present. Meanwhile, prosecutors were developing their version and trying to determine the specific motives for the crime. The investigation suggested that Melania was a controlling person who harbored a grudge against her husband because of his numerous infidelities but held him back for the sake of the child. She may have exerted constant pressure on him, which exacerbated the situation. Salvatore found an outlet in his relationship with Ludovica, who also put pressure on him. Melania was the third extra in that relationship, so Salvatore decided to get rid of her. Forensic experts determined that the woman died between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. on April 18th. The cause of death was 35 stab wounds. She had not been sexually assaulted, but the lowered underwear indicated that the attack occurred while the victim was squatting while urinating. The perpetrator probably crept up from behind and attacked when the victim was vulnerable. The nature of the wounds indicated that the murder was committed with particular cruelty because of personal hatred. Salvatore Paralisi was found guilty and sentenced to 22 years in prison and ordered to pay 3 million euros to the family of the murdered victim. He's currently serving his sentence in Milan, Italy. Custody of his daughter was given to Melania's family. Melania's family changed their daughter Victoria's surname to her mother's. The daughter does not visit her father in prison and does not want to know him anymore.